If you've been watching my videos since 2017, you might recall a series I did on the Heart of Darkness. It was a series of 4 videos where I discussed the Heart of Darkness novella by Joseph Conrad and its 2 adaptations, the video game Spec Ops: The Line and the movie Apocalypse Now. The purpose of that series was to try and understand what the Heart of Darkness was, and its effects on the human psyche. In the simplest terms, the heart is an abstract concept that describes the nature of the unconscious mind. The heart, like many other aspects of the unconscious mind, can possess your personality and bend it to its will, like a demon that needs to be exorcised. Given the right circumstances, this demon, this heart, can rise up and take hold of all of us. It can erase all sense of morality and civility and return us to that dark, unconscious state of mind, one that is shared by our animalistic ancestors. In each of these pieces of fiction, we see the primary characters succumb to the effects of the Heart of Darkness. In the case of the novella, the main character becomes bitter, disillusioned, and contemptuous of the world around him, specifically with the European government. In the video game and the movie, the main characters become so corrupted that they kill several people in cold-blooded, unperturbed ways. But in all cases, at least with one of the possible endings in Spec Ops, the main character is able to return to civilization. I can't be the only one who has pondered the following question: what happened to the characters of Marlowe, Captain Walker, and Captain Willard after their journeys? How do they deal with their Heart of Darkness after falling into its grasp? Do they succumb to despair? Do they find other ways to satisfy their murderousness? While we will never get answers for these particular characters, I think there is one piece of fiction that could act as a thematic successor to these stories. Maybe not in terms of narrative, but in regards to the animal side of nature continuing to possess us after traumatic circumstances. Obviously, the piece of fiction I am referring to is the video game Hotline Miami. I can't be the only person who noticed the similarities between the Colonel character in Hotline Miami 2 and the character of Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now. Not only do they look kind of similar, but they also spout the same basic philosophy. Like Kurtz, the Colonel in the game comments on how the government puppeteers its armies from afar, forcing them to slaughter or be slaughtered. This state of affairs reflects one's inner mental disposition, where the Heart of Darkness puppeteers all soldiers who give in to their animal instincts. This isn't exclusive to just the Colonel character. It affects all of the main characters in the Hotline Miami games. For this video, I'd like to examine how and why the main characters gave into these unconscious animal instincts, and it has to do with the enigmatic character known as Richard. If you came to this video seeking an explanation for Hotline Miami's brilliantly disjointed narrative, you will not receive that here. I will provide a general explanation of the game's setting, but if you wish for something more in-depth, let me recommend you a series of videos by a YouTuber named Squatch Gaming Official. Watch his playlist on these games, and you will be able to understand everything perfectly. I'll put a link to those videos in the description box below. The Hotline Miami games take place in an alternate history, where the Cold War between Russia and the United States grew with intensity, even into the late 1980s. In the year 1985, the US government was engaged in regular combat with the Russians, even on their own soil. Several of the characters that we follow across both Hotline Miami games are former Cold War soldiers, specifically those that were stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii. They, like the aforementioned Colonel, bear witness to the realities of war, and those realities slowly begin to corrupt them. Though we mostly don't see the effects of this corruption when they are in the line of duty. We mostly see them once they are all shipped back to the American mainland. I'll list some of those effects in a few minutes. 1 year later, we see one of the soldiers, named Beard, has moved back to San Francisco. He seems to be one of the few that evaded the effects of the Heart of Darkness, and is now living a simple, quiet life as a convenience store clerk. Before we can rejoice in Beard's personal victory, a flash of white light consumes the screen. The Russians, have dropped a nuclear weapon on San Francisco. As a result of this atrocity, the Russians and Americans agreed to a coalition, which would supposedly prevent anything like this from happening again. But following the establishment of this coalition, Russians began to flood into American cities, particularly Miami, Florida. It is in this city that Russians begin to dominate the criminal underground and subtly work against the American project. It is thanks to this coalition that vicious anti-Russian resentment begins to bubble up in American society. Before I discuss the murderous products of that resentment in a moment, I wish to return to the Heart of Darkness concept and how it is personified in the character of Richard. Richard is the most enigmatic, mysterious character in the Hotline Miami series. He appears to various characters in the game, and when he does, it is usually when the character is in a dreamlike state, or in a state of deep introspection. When he appears, he normally taunts the character he appears to with details about their personal life, about the immoral or incorrect actions that they have committed. Sometimes it appears that Richard has the ability to predict specific events that will occur in the near future. These supernatural, almost godlike characteristics make Richard stand out in the godless, bloody hellscape of Miami. His exploits lead the character to pose various questions. Is he a spirit? Is he even real? Why does he wear a rooster mask? There have been many theories regarding these questions, many that, I think, overcomplicate Richard's true nature. I think Richard's nature is really this simple. He is an avatar for the unconscious mind. He is the Heart of Darkness incarnate. I think if we accept this theory, it helps explain so many of Richard's traits and abilities. But first, allow me to explain some of the dynamics of the unconscious. As my regular viewers have heard me explain ad nauseum, there are two sides to the unconscious mind. There's the personal and the collective. The personal unconscious is where we store mental contents that are unique to you. Things like memories, schedules, and the like. The collective unconscious is something that binds all human beings together. It is much like the universal mind in Buddhism, a mind that all human beings are born from and that we return to upon death. It is this collective mind that births all living beings, including humans, with the traits that they need in order to survive. Things like instincts. For example, like with our animal ancestors, human beings are instinctually driven to preserve their life. We inherit that instinct after conception, and we inherit it from the collective unconscious. What differentiates us from most animals, however, is that we possess consciousness. Consciousness is what enables human beings to rise above their animal tendencies and establish moral codes, laws, and civilizations. However, circumstances will arise in one's life where human beings will cast their moral compass aside and return to a state resembling that of animals, where they will savagely kill without question or hesitation. This is usually brought on by some form of trauma, be it something intense like a war, or a deeply immoral act like betrayal, or an offensive trait like hypocrisy. The aforementioned characters of Captain Walker, Captain Willard, and Colonel Kurtz were all affected by these factors, and in large part, so were many of the characters of Hotline Miami. They all return to this animalistic state of mind, where they embrace and even love their murderousness. Richard personifies this animalistic murderous tendency because he wears a rooster mask. These animalistic murderous tendencies are performed by the characters primarily when they wear the animal masks. It is this part of their unconscious minds that guides their behavior in these moments. Plus, because this tendency is universal to humans, because it resides within the collective unconscious of the human species, it shows up in all of us. In respect to Hotline Miami, that tendency shows up in the same form because it is universal to all humans. That is why it always shows up in the form of Richard. There are other pieces of evidence to support my theory. Remember what I said before about Richard's ability to predict the future? We see this most clearly with the characters known as the fans. When one of the fans asks the others to put on Rooster masks, they both start saying things that they will repeat verbatim later on in the level, when they are invading the mobster headquarters. Richard, and by extension the fans, are able to do this because the unconscious exists outside of space and time. Consciousness, by definition, is the ability of humans to identify their place within space and time. Unconsciousness does not have these constraints. It exists within the past, present, and future simultaneously. If you want a good example of this, think about the concept of déjà vu. Have you ever seen something in real life that you swore you saw in a dream once? The original psychoanalysts would use that as an example of the collective unconscious existing outside of space and time. A future event arose within your unconscious mind while you were sleeping. In the case of the fans, their future demise was predicted when Richard possessed them for that brief moment. As I said before, Richard appears to a character when they are unable to deal with their hearts of darkness. The best example of this lies with the character of Jacket, the protagonist for the first game. He becomes resentful when the Russians nuked San Francisco, killing his best friend, the aforementioned Beard. Given this state of affairs, combined with the trauma he suffered when fighting the Russians in Hawaii, he gives into his murderous tendencies and allows himself to become Richard's puppet. He then goes on a violent killing spree, murdering every Russian mafia member that he can find. Once this happens, Richard torments him, asking him if he enjoys killing. The fact that this question is asked of Jacket, a mute avatar that the gamer can comfortably live vicariously through, is absolutely brilliant. By asking Jacket this question, it is also asking the player the question, which in a way demonstrates just how collective the unconscious is. Not only does it exist in the game and in real life, it can cross between the fictional and non-fictional worlds. In a way, our inner Richard is being activated when this question is asked, provoking one of the most uncomfortable fourth wall breaks in the history of gaming. There's one last trait of the unconscious that I'd like to point to. The fact is, the unconscious isn't a moral force, and neither is Richard. It is purely amoral. When Richard interacts with the various characters in the game, it doesn't seem like he's there to pass moral judgment. He is just there to make the characters be honest with themselves, to be cognizant of the fact that they are bound by the unconscious and all the traits they inherited. Just as a human does not decide when to feel anger or sadness, they cannot control their instinct towards destruction and violence. It can be mitigated, and you should always try to mitigate it, but it can't be erased. One does not have to be happy about this fact. Nobody likes to think that they aren't in complete control of their behavior, but once you realize that the emotions you feel, the ideas you have, that they aren't yours but instead came to you and possessed you via the unconscious, you realize just how much you aren't in control. You are the puppet of your unconscious mind. Not only that, a lot of us are like the characters in Hotline Miami, in that we are the puppets of external forces just as much as we are of internal forces. We are the puppets of our governments, of our employers. Given this immense lack of control that people have over these internal and external forces, given how often the tendency to savagery arises within all of us, we will inevitably all ask the same question. Why be moral? That question becomes even more pertinent when we suffer tragedies like the ones suffered by Jacket. In the case of the Hotline Miami games, it doesn't matter how moral you are. It doesn't matter if you try to do the right thing by being a good family man like Evan or looking after one's family like Richter. It doesn't matter if you murder and corrupt a nation's institutions like Detective Pardo or the son of the Russian mafia boss. In the end, all of them suffer the same painful death via a Russian nuclear weapon. Worst of all, if the opening scene of Hotline Miami 2's New Game Plus is anything to go by, they are doomed to repeat their fate over and over, a la Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence. It is a brilliant form of existential commentary, one that most people won't recognize if they only pay attention to the game's surface narrative. It makes you question the purpose of civilization and whether or not it can ever be fully effective, whether it can fully control our animalistic urges and stave off the products of resentment and bitterness. It makes us question whether or not we really have a choice, if we are ultimately the puppets of our unconscious mind. If Hotline Miami's perspective on choice is correct, then it seems like there's really only one choice that the player, and by extension the characters, can really make. Do we choose to play or not to play? I think most of you would choose to play, because after all, you enjoy hurting other people, don't you? Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a like. Also, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Supporting me on Patreon will help me continue to bring you all profound, enlightening content for many years to come. I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the description box below.